Chillies. Nice and stress-free, because there's not a lot to worry about here. We all know what a chilli looks like, and we all know that the red bit's nice and shiny, and the green bit, if you look, I mean, what we're really looking at is the textures here. We're not worried about perspective. We're not worried about very much at all. We've just got a nice wobbly shape with a shiny reflective surface there and a crinkly surface there. And the fact is, you don't have to worry too much about getting it right, because it's a very forgiving shape. So let's dive into our sketchbooks and make a start. Pencil. If you've all got your reference, but in case you haven't, I've got it here too. So a chilli. Let's start with the top one, although once you've drawn one, you can throw the reference away because it's a pretty random shape. And once you accept that the red bit kind of goes like this, I'm doing this without even looking at the reference. You don't need the reference for a chilli. You all know what a chilli looks like. It's an organic, nondescript shape like that. And the stem is a cap that fixes to the end under something like that. Now, if we zoomed in, we noticed that there was a very smooth, shiny surface here and a little bit of a wrinkly surface here. So let's put a bit of texture in there, which will show through our watercolour and add to the complexity and the interest in there. And also, I've noticed that when you're drawing with a pencil, if you want to give your drawing a bit of gravity, the lines at the bottom, at the base, if you make them a little bolder, like I'm doing here, a little thicker, give them a bit more weight, press down a little bit harder, can you see suddenly that almost underline, if you forgive the pun, it underlines the fact that this is the bottom line, and underneath here is the ground and there is shadow. It just gives it a bit more gravitas. All right. Let's dive into the paint straight away. There's not a great deal of variety in the colour there. It's just red and green. But there are more reds than one in that red. And there are more greens than one green in the stem as well. But we're going to achieve that by glazing. We're going to achieve that by glazing over the first colour. So step one, make a puddle of red. A really nice, bright cadmium red. Pillar box red. Okay, don't make it too thick and saturated, because, as I say, we're going to build up these layers of red by glazing. So we're going to put a wash down first that isn't full intensity, and then we're going to let that dry. And then when it is dry, we're going to come back and we're going to put another layer on. When you put a layer of watercolour on top of a dry layer of watercolour, that's called glazing, and that'll increase the value, it'll make it darker. Kitchen roll, indispensable. Grab yourself some of that if you haven't already. Right, and I'm going to prepare some green as well. Kind of green's not too critical. This is a nice kind of sappy green. That is actually bang on for the colour of a chilli stem. So make a nice puddle of that as well. And again, we're going to build up some texture in this stem by glazing. So we're going to let this dry, and then we're going to glaze over the green as well. Okay, clean off your brush. Every time you clean off your brush, don't go straight back into your colour. Quite instinctive to do, because if you do, you're taking all this water and you're diluting your colour. So after you've cleaned your brush, give it a dab, and then you're back into your colour and you're not diluting it every time you revisit. Okay, let's get this shiny red in. There's a very distinctive highlight across the top of these chilies. And we're going to achieve that by leaving it white. We're leaving it the paper white. So with this red, and this really is a case of the more random and, I was going to say clumsy, but that's not the word, but the more you allow the brush to do its thing, the more realistic it tends to look. So there, I've just done a quick wash of red over that chili. As you can see, it's not too concentrated. I'm going to wash my brush, and as I said before, dab it off. Let's get the stem in. The stem also has a highlight across the top. So I'm going to leave that paper white as well. And just what we're really doing is just painting the shadows. And if I pulled my brush off and I've left a little droplet there, I can just drink that up with my thirsty brush, like so. All right, while that's drying, let's move on to the next one. And you know what? I'm going to leave that aside now because I know what a chili looks like. And I don't need a reference. So let me bring you in closer. And let's do another one. Do it facing the other way. I'm not looking at any reference at all. I'm just starting off. Give it a little bit of an extra wobble, because this one might have dried out a little bit. And then get that cap in, stem in. So this is completely freeform drawing with no reference at all. Those ghost textures in there. Maybe a little bit of texture across there. Give this bottom edge a bit more weight, like so. And let's get the red in as well again. This red may have been a little watery, so I'll just give it a bit more punch, I think. Hold on, can you see that? Again, filling it in, but leaving the highlight across the top. And as I say, you don't need a reference to spot the highlight. You just know that it's in the top third of the chili. And it's the highlight that tells us that this is shiny. It's a shiny fruit. Or is it a vegetable? I don't know. Really quick, really simple. Wash off, dab off into the green. And again, just doing the underside of the green and leaving the highlight across the top. Let's do another. Let's be a little bit more adventurous and give him a hook. Although, looking downhill. Bit of texture on the stem where the wrinkles are. Bit of weight on the bottom line. Wash, dab, paint. As with most watercolour approaches, it's best to be quick and confident. Be brave, because it'll look nicer, strangely enough. Wash, dab into the green. All right, let's do another one. big one. There. Feeling ambitious, I'll put an end on that one. Put a bit of interest and texture in that stalk. Maybe a bit of extra weight on that bottom line. And in with the red. Wet brush, remove excess water into the red. Beautiful. Doesn't matter if you go over the edge. It's a spontaneous sketch. If it goes over the edge, all it does is show that you've done it briskly and enjoyed it. Right, this fellow up here is now dried. So we're going to increase the value because as the chilies roll over, they get darker as they move away from the light. So I'm going to beef up this red a little bit. Back into there and give it a bit more clout. Excuse me. Right, now I'm painting in the darker areas. I mean, let's just dash back to our reference. You can see down here, that shadow there tells us that that form is moving away from the light. It's moving out of the light and entering the shade. And that's what gives it its three-dimensionality. If you're really smart and observant, you'll be able to see that the light is reflecting off this white surface and illuminating the underside of the chili there. And if you're really smart, you might be able to achieve that. We're going to put another color on there. I think if you look closely at this, you'll see that it's made up of it's a blue tint, it's a purple, it's a maroon. So we'll focus on this shadow that rolls the chili round. And then later on, we'll come back and we'll just add a dash of purple or magenta or something in there to give it a bit more oomph. Meanwhile, back to this more intense red, which we are now going to glaze over the top of the dry red there. So if I now come in and I do this, you can see that that immediately makes that chili rounder. It suddenly moves further round and becomes more three-dimensional. And I can do the same with the stalk as well. I've not left a lot of room there, but if I go back to my green and give that a bit more clout as well by adding a bit more pigment, I can just put in a few dashes like so, and that will also give it a bit more oomph. You see? Look at this fella. Wash the brush, dab it off because I don't want to dilute this red. Back into here, and I'm painting the underside of this one. I'm glazing on a secondary layer of paint on top of the dry, which is making it darker. Because watercolour is translucent, the more layers I put on top of each one I do, it makes it dark, it lowers the value. Okay. Wash, dab into the green. Put a slightly larger stalk on this, so this will be a little clearer. So look, if I just put a bit of green under there, that also has more of a rollover, more depth. And as we noticed earlier, it's a rough, old, craggy piece of vegetation. I've sharpened the end of this brush, and I very often like to get in and just rough up the painted surface that I've created. And I don't know if you can see that, but that also just makes it, it gives it more texture. Right. Clean dab into the red. Let's give this a bit more. It's nice if you, because it's a wobbly surface, isn't it? So you can achieve that with a wobbly brush stroke. Really nice and simple and satisfying things to paint. Very forgiving. You can't get the shape of a chili wrong, really. I've got a little hair in there. If you do get a hair in your paint, don't ruin it by trying to grab it out. Wait for it to dry and then it'll just brush off. Beef up this stalk. Just a few dabs there, make it look really quite rough. Maybe give it a scratch with my pointy stick. Nice. Let's get down to this last one. Oh, I forgot to do that green. But this second layer really adds depth. It's a very handy technique to utilize glazing. All right, nice and fiery. So again, I'm painting really where the shadow is, where the shade is. I'm leaving the highlight white. Okay, so you remember we were saying that there's a band of shadow in there that's slightly darker than the red. If we look at that, for example, this here, it's a purple. It's almost a purple. Let's try purple. You can always darken red by adding its complementary color, of course, which is green. But I think that'd make it too murky. I think this is a purple that I've got here. If you haven't got a purple, take one of your reds. You've generally got 2 reds or 3 reds in your paint set. There's hot red, which is the one we've painted the chilies with, and there's a cool red, which is often called permanent rose or something. And it's got more blue in it. So I'm into my cool red here. You can see the difference between the two: hot red, cool red. You remember we spotted earlier that the light hitting the surface of the table and then bouncing up was gently illuminating the underside of that. So the dark bit is slightly above the bottom of the chili. I don't want to get in there too bold, but let's just see if we can. That's a little weak. Must have been a little bit too reluctant to dive in with strong colour there. And I'm just dabbing because that is still wet. And I'm adding that secondary colour to give that a bit more clout. I can probably go stronger still. Let's try it on this one. So I'm dabbing, it's still wet. So I'm just dabbing colour in here. It's called charging in. Not actually painting, because if I was to paint, then I'd pull away the underlying colour. So I'm just dropping in some colour there. I'm leaving the very, very underside light, and I'm just putting that shadow in about 1/3 of the way up. And that works, doesn't it? That gives it a real roll round. Okay. Yeah, pretty convincing chilies. I might use the same approach on these stems. If I go back to my green, you've usually got a couple of greens in your paint pot too. I've got this one here, which is all, so like, I think it's a viridian, which is a pretty nasty color. It's like a kind of acidic green that you very rarely see in nature at all. But if I was to glaze it over the top of this nice sap green, it would probably give me a rather nice shadow or shaded, because of course the underlying green will show through. It just gives it a bit more clout. Okay, nice. Right, so I'd say they're done, but they're floating. They're floating in midair, so it'd be rather nice to ground them. You know, going back to this again, look, these fellas, they've got a nice shadow underneath, which tells us that it's sitting on a surface. These are floating in midair, which is nice. You know, they make a very nice, striking design. But I'm going to try and sit them on a surface by putting a shadow in. So I've got in here, it's a kind of neutrally sepia thing down at the bottom end of my paint pot. So I'm going to mix up a bit of that. Grab that. And I'm going to put in a shadow. Now remember how we do shadows? We want these shadows to be soft edged. You see, they're crisp underneath, they define the bottom edge of the chili, and then as they move away from the chili, they fade to nothingness. And we achieve that by going in with the shadow, quickly rinsing our brush, dabbing off the excess water, and then bringing that wet brush up to the edge that we want to soften. Let me try and show you what I mean. So in with the shadow, like so. Take him across there. Wash that brush, dab off the excess, and then with a wet brush, just reactivate that edge, and the water and the paint will rush into there. If it's going too far, you know, this has got a bit haywire, so I'll dab that off, and I can always lift stuff away with a thirsty brush. Lift off excess moisture with a dry brush. When I say dry, just take out the excess moisture. I've got a puddle there, see? So if I just touch that brush tip into there, look how it hoovers up that puddle. And then that chili is sitting on a surface. The surface in here, I'll take that down another level in value, because just as the surface disappears underneath the chili, there's hardly any light at all. So that needs to be darker, but I'm going to do that when it's dry, when I glaze over it, like we glazed on the chili. Let's try another shadow down here. You have to be quick, you have to be brisk, otherwise this edge will dry. So quickly get onto there before it dries. Because if it dries, it'll leave a stain. It'll leave a tide mark. There we go. Speed is of the essence here. That made that shadow a bit darker. Quickly wash, quickly dab, and quickly come up to that edge before it dries. And that softens it up. Shadow's a bit darker, and I think I like it darker. Maybe take it back a bit. Because, you know, watercolours very often about taking paint off. As much about taking paint off as it is about putting it on. If I think he's a bit dark, just wipe some off. That's a successful one. This one's dry. Let's try and put a bit more clout underneath there, in there. That's where it needs to be darkest, right underneath. Voila. This last one down here. Again, really, really quick. Quickly rinse, quickly dab, quickly onto that edge before it dries. Especially if you're not using watercolor paper, if you're just in a sketchbook, as I am, this paint is going to soak straight in and it's going to start to dry straight away. So you have to be very quick to catch it before it leaves a hard edge. Okay. And that is pretty much it. I might just put, fiddling with the shadow, I might just put a little extra dark edge right underneath. So I'm going to go quite intense with this bit of black here. It's not black, it's grey. I suppose it would have had a name once upon a time. But it's a kind of murky sepia. And I'm coming right underneath there with some really intense colour. But I still want to soften that edge. I don't want any hard edges there, so wash and dab. It's probably a bit intense, that is, so I'm just pulling a little bit of colour out, like that. Yeah, that looks nice. That bit of extra depth, it's really made the underside of there glow, hasn't it? See if I can achieve that with the others. That's using a stronger shadow tone and going in tight to the underside of there. And softening it off. There we go. That was probably okay. I'm probably happy with that shadow already. Let's just put a bit more under here to lift him off the surface. Hard edge, don't want it. Wet it and lose it. Ah, not bad. Okay, everybody, any questions? Probably not. That was a really, really simple little class. Really simple subject. Go on, fill another page up and enjoy it. This gives lots of practice on pigment control, edge control, glazing. This is a lovely, lovely little lesson to play with. All right, I'm going to unmute. Can I unmute you all? I haven't found the unmute all button, so unmute yourselves.
Morning, Martin. I was late.
Who was that?
Hilary.
Hilary. Hello, Hilary. How are you?
Hi, I'm all right. I have an Asda delivery every Tuesday morning, and
oh, how inconvenient!
It was late this morning.
Yeah. Never mind. All right, everybody. I'm going to leave you to practice. It's been lovely to see so many of you along here.
Martin, can I just ask quickly, did I miss something? Did you go over the edges of your chilies with a pen?
No,
Oh.
No, I've just got quite a chunky dark 4B pencil. That's probably why they look so dark.
Okay, thanks.
No, it's just a pencil this time. Could do the mid pen. Absolutely no harm in that.
Excuse me, Martin.
Hello?
Hello, excuse me, Martin. Could I ask a question as a newbie?
Of course.
I noticed having some difficulty, so I need to sort out my light source. But when you were doing the initial red, or even the secondary red, I noticed that you left it quite sort of free form in the middle. And was that just with dabbing a light paintbrush on the initial, on the initial wash? I'm just trying to get that right, because that's mine's.
But you mean you're trying to get this wobbly line right?
Yeah.
That's when you don't try very hard, and you just do it. I wouldn't say slapdash or haphazard. Although haphazard's probably a good way to describe it.
Yeah.
It's I don't know. It's just letting the brush do a little dance and find its own way.
Okay.
Because if you look at the reference, there's no point in trying to paint this accurately. In fact, it looks better the more inaccurate you are, in my opinion. It looks quite nice and random, and it described, it's not a very smooth surface, is it? It's got hollows and rumps and bumps. So a nice haphazard approach to your brushwork is probably the way forward.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, then everybody, have a fabulous day. Fill a couple more pages with chilies, because you don't need a chili in front of you to be able to do a chili. You can make them up. You can make them any shape you like. You can even try green chilies and purple chilies if you want. Let me just click back, say bye to everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
All right.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. I will see you next week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Ta-ra.